Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Let's tell you about Barclays and its chief executive are to be investigated by the two main financial watchdogs over attempts to identify a whistleblower. The bank has already given Jess Staley a formal reprimand and cut part of his annual bonus. Our business presenter Ian King joining us live from our studio in the city. He's in trouble, isn't he?
Yes, Kay, this is pretty damaging stuff for Barclays and for Jess Staley in particular. And given that since he joined the bank in December 2015, he was seen as having done a pretty good job. He put a focus on ethics and good conduct right at the heart of what he was trying to do. Even before he set foot in the bank, he sent an internal memo to employees saying that this was an area that he was going to be particularly hot on. Now, what happened, Kay, is that in June 2016, Mr. Staley had hired a former colleague of his from his JP Morgan days to come and work for him at Barclays. Subsequently, members of the board, not including Jess Staley himself, received a letter from an anonymous writer highlighting personal issues that this new employee had had in the past and highlighting Mr. Staley's attempts to help this guy sort his life out previously. And this was Mr. Staley became aware of the letter and asked Barclays Group Security to look into it. They didn't come up with anything. They didn't come up with a name. It subsequently turns up, he's told, you can't look at that, it's inappropriate because this is going to be treated as a whistleblowing procedure. Mr. Staley then had another go at trying to find out the name of the author of this letter when he was under the impression that it was OK for him to now do so. Fast forward to January this year, Kay, and an internal employee at Barclays says, well, there are problems with our whistleblowing procedures here in Barclays, and this is what went wrong when you've got this sort of incident happening. So it's been escalated to board level subsequently. I'm told the board even had a 4-hour meeting yesterday discussing this matter. They've decided to reprimand Mr. Staley. As you say, the Financial Conduct Authority and the Predation Regulation Authority are now looking into it. They will report back in the summer. It's likely Barclays could get hit with a fine. There's also a review going on in Barclays now of its whistleblowing procedures. So it's a bit of a mess. Bear in mind that this is not the first time that a Barclays CEO has been embroiled with regulators. Bob Diamond, who was Mr. Staley's predecessor, but one, well, if you recall, he lost his job in July 2012 over the LIBOR rigging scandal. He and his predecessor, John Varley, have both been questioned by the Serious Fraud Office over a fundraising that Barclays did back in 2008. So there are regulatory skirmishes that surround this bank on and off over the years, and it's really not very helpful. As you say, he could lose some of his bonus. His bonus, the size of the bonus that he will lose will depend on the eventual fine, the punishment that he gets from the FCA and the PRA, I suspect.
Okay. For now, thanks so much indeed. Thank you.
The head of Barclays is expected to be stripped of his £1 million annual bonus for attempting to uncover the identity of a whistleblower who'd raised concerns about a senior member of staff at the bank. Jess Staley could lose up to £1.3 million. He's also been issued with a formal reprimand and is subject to an investigation by the financial regulators. Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
When Jess Staley joined Barclays in 2015, he had a straightforward message: make the bank simpler and more profitable. The board and shareholders were delighted when he appeared to achieve both in his first year. There was a third issue he wanted to tackle, one he outlined to me in his first broadcast interview.
I do believe the banks lost their way 10, 15 years ago, and we lost a lot of trust through the financial crisis. We have an obligation to return that.
That obligation was undermined today after it was revealed the chief executive had tried, not once but twice, to find out the identity of a Barclays whistleblower. In June last year, the board at Barclays received an anonymous letter raising concerns about the recruitment of a senior employee by Mr. Staley who had suffered personal problems in 2009 and 2010. Jess Staley found out about the letter, felt it was a malicious attack, and asked Barclays internal security to find the whistleblower's identity, but was told his request was not appropriate. The next month, after Barclays investigated the allegations and said they were without substance, Mr. Staley tried again, but failed, to obtain the identity. US law enforcement agencies were approached to give support. The Barclays board only became aware of Jez Staley's attempted intervention when it received a second whistleblower letter earlier this year. It will now be for the regulators to decide. Is this a yellow card offence, a warning for a stupid mistake, or is it a straight red for a chief executive whose very temperament is now under scrutiny? In a statement, Mr. Staley admitted he had made mistakes. I have apologised to the Barclays board and accepted its conclusion that my personal actions in this matter were errors on my part. I will also accept whatever sanction it deems appropriate. The regulators could go as far as banning Mr. Staley from working in banking, its ultimate sanction, as well as imposing fines.
Whistleblowing is about trust, and part of that trust is protecting the identity of the whistleblower. And if you've got a senior person looking for the messenger rather than listening to the message, then there's a problem.
Mr. Staley has questions to answer. He was very close to the person he hired. Did that cloud his judgment? His pay will be cut. By how much? The man hired to reset Barclays' position on trust knows his bank is back in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Now, the boss of Barclays, Jez Staley, could lose his annual bonus after two regulators opened an investigation into his conduct in a whistleblowing case. He'd tried to discover who wrote a whistleblowing letter to the bank, which had raised concerns about a senior employee who'd been recruited by Barclays earlier that year. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, reports.
Whistleblowers. They're the anonymous eyes and ears of the city. The banks say they want them to come forward to expose corruption and wrongdoing and help mend their tattered reputations. But what happens when a whistleblower says something that the bank's chief executive doesn't like?
We need to re-establish that credibility at Barclays.
Jez Staley, speaking here last year, is the chief executive of Barclays. As of today, he's also the subject of two regulatory investigations after the bank revealed he tried to uncover the identity of a whistleblower who'd raised questions about the hiring of a senior bank employee. Last June, the whistleblower wrote a letter to Barclays board with concerns about the employee's personal life and his close ties to Mr. Staley. The board opened an investigation, while Mr. Staley, a source said, was outraged and sought to find out who the whistleblower was. Staley was told to back off, but a month later, when the investigation was over, he reopened his own inquiries. What's particularly embarrassing for Mr. Staley is the revelation that he went after the whistleblower just a month after he was told specifically not to. Now, the board of Barclays says it believes he made an honest mistake, but it's a mistake that leaves many unanswered questions. For example, who knew about Mr. Staley's investigation? What would he have done had he found out the identity of the whistleblower? And why did it take the board of Barclays 5 months to discover what its chief executive was up to? In an email sent to staff this morning, Mr. Staley did accept he'd made errors, but he went on to characterise the whistleblower's letter as an unfair personal attack on the employee and said he wanted to stop the harassment of a person who did not deserve that treatment. He acknowledged whistleblowing was valuable, but nowhere did he accept the letter writer was a whistleblower. Barclays said today it took the integrity of its controls extremely seriously and would launch a review. But this latest scandal is yet more bad news for the bank.
It's damaging for Barclays' reputation. If you look at what's happened over the last 10 years in terms of banking misconduct, there's obviously been a lot of that. It's very important for banks to protect whistleblowers because of their tarnished reputation, and that's something that the CEO of a big UK bank should know.
Depending on the outcome of the regulator's investigations, Barclays could withhold more than £1 million from Mr. Staley's bonus for 2016. The chief executive didn't ever find out who the whistleblower was, but he's certainly found out the cost of trying.
I've been